There's a stretch of land in central Wyoming where the wind never truly stops, and the prairie grass bends in endless undulating waves. Just outside the sleepy town of Riverton, Highway 26 carves a lonely line through wild sage and yellowed pasture. It's the kind of place most people pass through without looking back, unless you're a rancher or someone with memories buried deep in the soil. But every day, morning and evening, without fail, there's a sight along the battered fence line that makes drivers slow their trucks, or at least glance twice in the rearview mirror. A black horse stands motionless by the fence. His coat absorbs the light until he seems more like a shadow than flesh and blood. The locals call him Midnight. He's tall, muscled, with a wild, tangled mane that never seems to lose its midnight sheen, no matter how many storms roll through. He doesn't graze near the fence. He doesn't wander into the open pasture or mingle with the few half-wild Mustangs that sometimes pass through. He simply stands there, head high, eyes fixed on something out there, something nobody else can see. No one knows exactly when Midnight started coming. Some say he appeared after the spring floods 3, maybe 4 years back. Others insist he's always been there, a piece of the landscape as permanent as the ridge itself. What everyone agrees on is his ritual. At dawn, just as the sky begins to pale and the first trucks roar down the highway, he's there, always facing north, as if waiting for someone to return from the far horizon. And every evening, as the last slant of sunlight gilds the fence and the coyotes begin their song, he stands in the same spot, unmoving until dusk finally swallows him whole. At the Wagon Wheel Cafe, old-timers lean in and whisper, their voices dropping low, as if afraid Midnight might overhear. He's waiting for a ghost, or maybe an angel. Others, more practical, dismiss it with a shrug, but even they can't explain why he refuses food from anyone but one person, Clara Reed. Clara is a retired park ranger with a weather-beaten face, sharp blue eyes, and a quiet that settles around her like a second skin. She's lived alone on the edge of town since her husband died. Every morning, rain or shine. She drives her rusty pickup out to the ridge, her dog Jasper riding shotgun. She never calls to Midnight, never tries to approach. Instead, she places a bucket of fresh water and a scoop of oats just inside the fence, then sits on the tailgate, her hands folded, eyes fixed on the horizon, the same way the horses are. Sometimes she hums an old cowboy lullaby, letting the melody drift across the grass, but she never breaks the silence between them. The other locals, ranch hands and young families alike, keep their distance. Some have tried to win Midnight's trust with apples or sweet feed, only to watch him turn away with a regal indifference. Others have posted photos of him online. #MidnightOn26 trending for a week last winter after a snowstorm dusted his back, making him look like a phantom rising from the white. But mostly they respect the boundary he draws. This fence is his line, and whatever he's guarding or waiting for remains a mystery. Children make up stories. They say Midnight's waiting for a cowboy lost in a blizzard, or for a herd that vanished in the storm, or maybe for the little girl whose laugh was once heard ringing down the valley. Adults, meanwhile, invent practical theories. He's feral, he's someone's runaway, he's too old to move on. But no one's ever seen him sleep, or lie down, or even blink for long. He's just there, a sentinel in the half-light, day after day. There are evenings when the wind changes, carrying a sharp tang of the rain or the distant scent of wood smoke, and Midnight's ears twitch, his muscles tensing as if listening for a forgotten voice. The highway traffic slows to a hush, the fields darken, and Clara's silhouette sits quietly on the pickup bed, 2 sentinels on the ridge, separated by a strip of barbed wire and the unspoken weight of whiting. Some nights, teenagers park nearby, their laughter echoing across the open plain, but even the bravest don't dare approach. There's something about Midnight's unwavering presence, a dignity, almost a grief, that hushes them. A few leave behind offerings, a flannel shirt, a silver horseshoe, once even a faded photograph pinned to the fence. By morning, Clara collects whatever's left. Midnight never touches them. On the third Sunday of May, as the town wakes to the sound of robins and the smell of coffee drifting from open windows, Clara finds fresh tire tracks near the fence. She pauses, noticing the footprints circling the spot where Midnight stands. Someone new has come to the ridge, someone curious enough to break the unspoken rule. The wind tugs at her hat, and for the first time in a long while, Clara wonders if the waiting is about to end, or if, like all stories born of silence and longing, this one is only just beginning. And still, every sunrise and sunset, Midnight keeps his vigil. The prairie holds its breath, and the question hangs in the air. Who or what is he waiting for? Nora Bell had always found comfort in the lens of a camera. For over a decade, she'd chased stories across the Pacific Northwest, burned-out buildings in Portland, old-growth forests clinging to Oregon cliffs, faces of people who swore they'd never tell their secrets until the moment her camera blinked red. But lately, all of it felt empty. The awards, the long hours, the rough edits hunched in her dark apartment, none of it filled the gnawing space inside her chest, the sense that, somewhere along the way, she'd lost what she was looking for. So when the email came, a small grant to shoot Americana on the road, she barely hesitated before packing her battered Suburban and pointing it east into the sun-baked emptiness of Wyoming. She arrived in Riverton at the tail end of June, the air brittle and bright, the sky so wide it seemed to threaten to swallow her whole. 3 days in, she'd already filmed an old-time fiddler on Main Street and a retired rodeo queen who could still swing a lasso with the best of them. But none of it felt like a story. Just fragments, scenery, the hollow sound of her own voice echoing back from empty rooms. On the fourth morning, running on bad coffee and too little sleep, Nora took a detour out along Highway 26, chasing the light for a landscape shot. The road shimmered ahead, heat rising in ghostly waves. That's when she saw him, the black horse. So still he seemed part of the land itself. She almost drove past, almost dismissed it as a trick of the light, but something in the shape of his stance, the way his head was held so deliberately high, made her slow to a crawl. She pulled onto the gravel shoulder, engine idling. Through the windshield, she watched him for a long moment. He didn't move, didn't blink, only flicked one ear as a semi thundered past, dust trailing behind. A battered fence separated him from the highway, and behind that, the pale green sweep of open prairie. There was no barn, no obvious owner, just this lone black figure, regal and solitary, refusing to acknowledge the world around him. Curiosity prickled beneath Nora's fatigue. She grabbed her camera, stepping out into the relentless wind. The horse watched her approach, but didn't shy away. Up close, his eyes were startling, large, dark, and full of a kind of ancient, patient sorrow. Nora felt it in her gut, the same way she used to feel the start of a real story, back before everything became about deadlines and likes. She raised her camera, careful, respectful. Through the viewfinder, Midnight's coat seemed to shimmer, each muscle perfectly defined, mane tangled with burrs and wisps of prairie grass. The world narrowed to the rhythmic click of the shutter. She forgot the ache in her back, the dust clinging to her shoes, the tired ache behind her eyes. All that mattered was capturing that moment, that feeling, a loneliness so palpable it made her chest ache. A voice startled her. "You're wasting your time." She turned to see a man in faded jeans and a Stetson, leaning on the hood of a dented Ford. Behind him, 2 other ranch hands watched with arms crossed, faces unreadable. "That horse don't want rescuing," the first man said, spitting into the dust. "He's wild as the wind. Just wants to be left be." Nora let the camera hang around her neck. "He doesn't look wild. He looks like he's waiting for something." The ranch hand shrugged. "Suit yourself. But folks around here, don't mess with him. Belongs to no one. If you know what's good for you, you'll pack up and head on." He turned back to his truck, his friends muttering something she couldn't quite catch about city folks, or maybe about lost causes. Nora watched them go, dust swirling in their wake, then turned back to the horse. Midnight hadn't flinched. It hadn't so much as twitched an ear at the commotion. She crouched by the fence, careful to stay out of reach, and watched. The prairie wind whipped loose hair across her face, and in the distance, thunderheads piled up against the mountains. She wondered, for a fleeting moment, if she'd finally found what she'd been chasing. A story that wasn't just spectacle, but something deeper, something true. For an hour, she watched. Midnight didn't eat, it didn't pace, didn't even rest a hoof. He just stared, unblinking, at the northern horizon, as if waiting for a signal only he could recognize. Later, back in town, Nora asked around. At the cafe, the waitress gave her a sideways look and told her about Clara Reed, the only one who ever left oats and water by the fence. "But don't expect Clara to say much," she warned. "She's got her own ghosts." That evening, unable to shake the image of Midnight standing sentinel against the dying sun, Nora drove back out to the ridge. She parked a respectful distance away and watched as Clara arrived in her old pickup, dog in tow. The two women acknowledged each other with a nod. No words needed. Clara placed the bucket and oats in her usual spot, then sat on the tailgate, eyes trained on the fading light. Midnight stayed as he always did, regal and still, refusing the food until Clara retreated a good 20 yards away. When Nora lifted her camera again, she noticed something she'd missed before. A faint white scar under Midnight's left eye, shaped almost like a crescent moon. It made him seem even older, as if he'd seen things no one else could bear. The second evening, Nora set up her tripod as the sun dipped below the mountains. As the light faded, Midnight finally moved. Just a step, then another. A cautious dance to the water bucket. He drank slowly, almost reverently, and then returned to his post by the fence. Nora filmed all of it, heart pounding. She didn't know what she was searching for anymore, closure for herself, or perhaps a way to help the horse find his own. Back at her motel, as lightning flickered on the horizon, she loaded the footage onto her laptop, playing it back in slow motion. There was something about Midnight's stillness, the gravity of his presence, that made every frame feel heavy with meaning. She ignored the warnings from the ranch hands, from the townsfolk who told her to leave well enough alone. Something about Midnight's eyes had settled deep inside her, a mystery she couldn't shake. That night, she made a decision. Tomorrow, she'd bring her best camera and stay from dawn until dusk. If Midnight was waiting, so was she. A storm rolled in, rattling the motel window, but Nora hardly slept. Outside, on the dark prairie, Midnight kept his vigil, and a story neither of them could name began to unfold. Dawn in Wyoming comes quietly, the sky bruised purple and rose, the grass painted silver with dew. On the ridge by Highway 26, Nora Bell sipped burnt motel coffee from a travel mug, watching as the land slowly woke. In the hush before traffic picked up, the world belonged to the animals, the distant call of meadowlarks, the shuffle of rabbits through sagebrush, and, of course, Midnight. He was already in place, standing like a statue against the haze, nose angled north, shadow cast long and thin behind the battered fence. Nora had resolved to shadow him for a week, intent on capturing his ritual. The first morning, she almost missed it, lost in camera settings, fiddling with the focus. But just after sunrise, Midnight twitched his ears, lifted his head a fraction, and started moving. It was more than a walk. It was a performance, a pilgrimage. He left his post by the fence, trotting at a steady, determined pace, eastward along the wire. Nora shouldered her camera and followed at a respectful distance, her boots slipping in the slick grass. He looped wide, never getting too close to the scattered ranch houses or the distant silhouettes of grazing mustangs. Instead, he circled through a patch of aspen trees, their white bark shining like bones, then crossed a shallow creek and returned, always arriving back at his post just as the first pickup trucks passed on the highway. Nora filmed every step, keeping her distance so as not to disturb him. The loop never varied, always the same route, the same careful attention to invisible boundaries. Once, a pair of local teenagers drove past, shouting and honking. Midnight didn't flinch. He paused only when a hawk screamed overhead, head tipping back, eyes following the bird until it vanished into the sun. By noon, the prairie was quiet. Nora reviewed her footage in the shadow of her car, squinting at her laptop screen. Midnight rested then, standing near the fence, eyes half closed but never truly asleep. Once, Clara arrived, setting down her usual offerings. Nora noted how the older woman never tried to speak to the horse, nor to Nora herself. They were 3 sentinels now, each guarding their silence. Dusk brought a repeat of the morning. Midnight left his post, trotted the loop, then returned just as the horizon caught fire with sunset. Nora was struck by the discipline, the unspoken purpose. This wasn't the aimless wandering of a lost animal, it was ritual, devotion, an act of waiting or remembrance that only Midnight seemed to understand. On the 3rd day, Nora edited together a 90-second video, working by lamplight in her motel room. She titled it, "The Horse Who Won't Leave." The clip showed Midnight's loop from sunrise to sunset, each step slow and deliberate, the camera lingering on his dark, soulful eye. Nora added no narration, only the natural soundtrack, wind in the grass, distant thunder, the rhythmic crunch of hooves. Before posting, she hesitated. Would the world see what she saw? Or would they reduce it to a viral oddity, a meme stripped of its heartbreak? But something in her compelled her to share. She uploaded the video and went to bed, exhausted. By morning, her phone buzzed with notifications. The video had gone viral. Comments flooded in from all over the country, some from overseas. Strangers wrote about their own grief, dogs that waited by the door for years after their owners passed, horses that refused new riders, even people who kept an empty chair at the table for someone who'd never return. The question echoed again and again. Who's he waiting for? Others speculated on Midnight's story, spinning elaborate theories about lost cowboys, broken hearts, abandoned families. Some offered practical advice. Check for a brand or a microchip. Others simply left prayers and virtual candles. By the 3rd day, a regional news site picked up the story, sending a young journalist out to the ridge. Nora was there, camera slung over her shoulder, notebook in her pocket. The journalist, a kid named Luis, fresh out of college, watched Midnight for a while, then turned to Nora with a tentative smile. He really never leaves? Never, Nora replied. Not for storms, not for people. He waits. The story grew legs. TV crews started calling. Nora gave a few reluctant interviews, always focusing on Midnight's dignity, his mystery. She insisted the fence remain untouched, that no one try to rescue the horse, no matter how many well-meaning strangers offered to drive out with trailers. In town, reactions were mixed. Some folks grumbled that outsiders were meddling in local affairs, while others felt a strange pride, like the town's quiet sorrow had finally been witnessed by the world. At the Wagon Wheel Cafe, Clara's presence was met with a new kind of respect, as if her quiet devotion had been validated. That week, Nora began sleeping in her car out by the ridge, camera batteries charging on the dashboard, journal pages filling with sketches and notes. The more she watched Midnight, the more she wondered if the story was really about the horse at all, or about everyone who'd ever waited, everyone who'd ever stood guard over the ruins of something precious. One cold morning, she witnessed something new. A coyote crossed the far edge of the prairie, pausing to sniff at the wind. Midnight watched, ears pricked, but didn't move. The coyote approached the fence, curious, but after a long, silent standoff, it backed away. Midnight returned to his loop, undisturbed. Nora filmed every second, heart pounding. There was power in that patient, wordless refusal to yield ground. Late that night, after uploading a second clip, Nora scrolled through her growing inbox. She found messages from animal lovers, from grief counselors, from veterans and children, and old women who'd lost husbands long ago. The story had struck a nerve. And beneath the viral noise, a new question started to haunt Nora. Was it possible to wait so long for someone that you forgot how to leave? Outside, Midnight kept his vigil. The prairie wind carried the distant sound of thunder, and the headlights of passing cars flickered across the fence. Somewhere in the darkness, a story was unfolding. A story about loyalty, memory, and the stubborn hope that sometimes those who wait are finally found. It was the sixth day, and the morning light had a bite to it. Chill rolling down from the Wind River Mountains, carrying the promise of rain. Norah felt it through her jacket as she sat on the tailgate of her Suburban, jotting scattered notes between sips of lukewarm coffee. She'd barely slept, haunted by the rising chorus of online comments and the simple, aching mystery of the black horse. The horse who won't leave had become a minor legend overnight. The video now bouncing around Facebook feeds and news sites, even sparking arguments in horse owner forums. Some folks insisted Midnight had to be feral. Others swore they recognized something domesticated in his watchful stillness. Nora read every message, but none brought her closer to an answer. Every theory felt hollow. She wanted the truth, the horse's truth, not just the world's guesses. Her chance came from an unlikely source. A local vet tech named Casey Ward, who messaged her after seeing the video. "You want to know where he came from?" Casey wrote. "Bring coffee. Meet me at the edge of the pasture just before noon." Nora arrived to find Casey unloading a battered pickup, a weathered Stetson shading her freckled face. There was an efficient way about her, the kind Nora trusted instantly. So you want to solve the mystery?" Casey said, smiling over a travel mug. "Heard about your camera. Thought you might like a tool that's a bit less poetic." She pulled a small device from her jacket. A livestock microchip reader, the kind every animal clinic in Wyoming used on lost dogs and stray horses. "Sometimes," Casey explained, "rescued or registered animals have a chip, just under the skin on the left side of the neck. Most folks forget to check a horse, especially one as independent as this guy. If he's chipped, it'll beep." Together, they crossed the prairie. Clara was there already, sitting quietly, as always. Nora nodded to her and explained their plan in a low voice, careful not to disturb the horse. Clara simply nodded, her expression unreadable but not unkind. Nora watched as Casey carefully set up a small feed station just inside the fence, a bucket of oats, an old flannel shirt to disguise the device, and the microchip reader itself taped just beneath the rim. "When he drops his head to eat, this'll pass right by his neck," Casey said, pressing a button to make sure the reader was live. "Let's see if he's carrying any secrets." Then they waited. Clara sat with her back to the fence, humming her quiet melody, while Nora watched through her camera's long lens, heart thudding in her chest. Midnight, wary as ever, stood for what felt like hours, watchful, patient, unmoved by their presence. At last he inched toward the bucket, nostrils flaring as he checked the wind. He pawed the earth once, then dipped his head and began to eat. A sharp beep split the air. Nora's hands shook as Casey scrambled for the reader. "We got something," she whispered, scrolling through the tiny screen. Numbers flashed. A registration code? Then a name. Nightfire. Casey read aloud, voice soft with surprise. "Registered to the Kavanaaugh family. Address was just north of Riverton. That ranch by the creek, the one washed out in the flash flood a few years back." The name hit Nora like a punch. Nightfire. It fit, somehow. A name with history, with weight. But why would a horse who'd survived a disaster remain on this lonely ridge, refusing comfort, refusing even to leave the fence line? Back at her car, Nora dug through old news stories. The flood, she discovered, had been a tragedy, one of those once-in-a-century storms that tore through the valley, turning pasture into river overnight. The Kavanaghs had lost everything. Their barn, their home, nearly every animal they owned. The town had rallied, of course, but the scars were still raw in Riverton. Nora remembered the half-collapsed house she'd seen near the creek, the remnants of broken fencing snaking through the tall grass. Casey, watching her sift through headlines, shrugged. That horse could have run for miles. Most animals did. Instinct, you know. But if he stayed, Well, maybe he was looking for someone too. As the day faded, Nora called the number listed in the old registry. Her hand shook as she left a voicemail introducing herself, explaining about the video, the microchip, the horse by the highway. "He's still here," she said, voice barely steady. "He's been waiting every day. His name is Nightfire, isn't it?" She hung up and stared at the fading sunlight through the windshield, mind racing with questions. Why had Nightfire survived when so much was lost? Why had he never tried to go home? What did he see, day after day, as he stared north, unblinking at the empty road? Later that night, Nora posted an update to her growing following, choosing her words with care. "Midnight has a name. Nightfire. He belongs to someone. Tomorrow, we hope to hear their story." The responses flooded in. Relief, hope, a chorus of strangers rooting for a reunion, but Nora couldn't shake a single, aching thought. Sometimes, the ones who survive are haunted the most. Sometimes, even when the world is watching, the pain that holds you in place is invisible to everyone else. Outside, on the ridge, midnight, Nightfire, stood sentinel, the prairie wind tugging at his tangled mane. If he sensed the change, the hope kindling among the people watching from afar, he gave no sign. His vigil continued, patient and silent, the past locked behind those dark, watchful eyes. And as the prairie fell quiet, Nora realized she'd become part of his waiting too, part of the loop of longing that bound the horse, the land, and all the stories that had come before. Nora sat on the edge of her motel bed, her phone clutched tight in her hand, the air thick with the weight of anticipation. The sun was fading behind a bank of storm clouds, throwing golden stripes across the faded carpet, while outside the wind rattled the old glass in the window. She had left the voicemail with the Kavanaghs hours ago, but the silence that followed felt almost heavier than the days spent watching midnight by the fence. She kept glancing at her phone, refreshing her email, scrolling through messages from strangers who had become unexpectedly invested in the fate of a horse on the Wyoming plains. Her mind circled back to the old news clippings. A family devastated by the flash flood, a ranch swept away, a little girl's face in a blurred photograph, clutching a black horse with a crescent scar under its eye. The comments on her last update were filled with hope and nervous excitement, but Nora felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. What if the family never responded? What if Nightfire's story remained only half told, a mystery suspended between past and present, belonging to everyone and no one? As twilight deepened, Nora finally gave up waiting indoors and drove back to the ridge. The prairie was eerily quiet, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Clara's old truck was already there. Jasper sprawled at her feet while she sat in her usual spot. Clara nodded when Nora arrived, a silent acknowledgement, then returned to her vigil. Midnight, Nightfire, stood precisely where he always did, the wind tugging at his tangled mane, eyes fixed north, as if he sensed the approach of something monumental. Nora sat with him for a long while, camera resting on her knees, heart heavy with expectation. The hush felt holy, a space carved out of time, and for the first time, Nora felt like she truly understood what it meant to wait for something that might never come. Her phone buzzed, sharp and startling in the quiet. She nearly dropped it, fumbling to answer. The caller ID was unfamiliar, just a string of numbers. Nora's voice shook as she spoke. "Hello? This is Nora Bell." A woman's voice on the other end, cautious and thin, as if dredged up from deep water. "You called about Nightfire?" "Yes," Nora replied, swallowing, suddenly acutely aware of Clara listening nearby, of Midnight's silent presence at the fence. I think he's been here for years. I found his microchip. I wanted to be sure." There was a pause. The woman inhaled, and Nora could almost hear the memory, raw and unhealed in the silence. "He belonged to my daughter," the woman said quietly. "Emma, he was her whole world. When the flood came, everything—" The voice broke, then steadied. "The fences broke. Nightfire ran." Emma searched for months, every single day. We put up flyers. We rode miles. I think part of her never believed he was really gone. Nora nodded, even though the woman couldn't see her. "He's alive," she said softly. "He's waiting by Highway 26. I think he's been waiting for Emma this whole time." A sharp breath, then muffled voices. Nora could hear the chaos of a house in the background, the scraping of chairs, the sound of someone crying out, "Is it really him?" The woman came back, her voice steadier, tinged with disbelief and desperate hope. "We have a new ranch now. It's not far. She's older, but she never gave up. She's always said, if there was even a chance." In the background, a new voice, young but fierce, trembling with emotion. "We're going. Now." A flurry of movement. The line went dead. Nora sat in stunned silence for a moment, then turned to Clara, who had watched the whole exchange with quiet understanding. "They're coming," Nora said. "Tonight, or maybe at dawn." Clara nodded, her eyes shining in the half-light. "I thought he was waiting for something bigger than any of us," she murmured. "Maybe it was just home all along." The wind picked up, carrying the first drops of rain. Midnight stood motionless, but his ears twitched, his body tense as if he sensed a shift in the air, a long-awaited answer to a question only he could ask. That night, Nora barely slept. She posted a brief update for the world. "Nightfire's family has been found. Emma is on her way." The replies poured in, prayers, well wishes, even a few skeptics. But beneath the surface, Nora sensed a collective hope, 1,000 strangers holding their breath, waiting for the end of a story that had become their own. She spent the evening by the ridge. Camera ready, heart pounding. She imagined the Kavanaaugh packing into their truck, headlights cutting through the dark, Emma's face pressed against the window, eyes scanning every shadow for the horse she'd lost 4 years ago. She pictured the old ranch in ruins, memories washed away by floodwaters, and the new house, smaller perhaps, but still a home, still waiting to be made whole. The rain came in fits and starts, drumming on the roof of Nora's Suburban. At some point, Clara rose and left, her dog trailing behind her, but Nora stayed, unwilling to miss a single moment. Midnight never moved, not even as lightning flickered far to the south. He was a monument, a promise kept in muscle and bone. Just before dawn, the horizon bruised purple. Nora saw headlights approaching in the distance. Her breath caught. This was it, the beginning of the end, or maybe the start of something new. The car rolled to a stop, dust and mist swirling in its wake. The doors opened, and a family stepped out, a woman with tired eyes in a red jacket, a man moving with the careful slowness of someone carrying invisible wounds, and a teenage girl, Emma, older than in the photos, but with the same determined set to her jaw. Emma moved ahead of her parents, not hesitating, eyes locked on the figure at the fence. Midnight didn't turn, not at first. Nora watched, camera forgotten at her side, as Emma crossed the field. No fear, no doubt, only the reckless, wild hope of a girl who had waited far too long. Behind her, Mrs. Kavanagh's voice broke the dawn. "He waited for you," she whispered, her words lost to the wind. In that moment, with the prairie waking and the first light crawling across the grass, Nora felt the story settle into its bones. Whatever happened next, some part of the world had been healed. Midnight's waiting was almost over. Dawn broke across the Wyoming plains with a hush more profound than any night. The first rays of sunlight crept low across the ridge, gilding the battered fence and catching in the tangled mane of the horse who waited. The air was cold, sharp with dew, tinged with the earthy scent of rain from the night before. In the half-light, everything felt suspended, as if the world itself was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. The Kavanagh's truck was the only vehicle on the empty road. Its headlights cut through the fading darkness, tires crunching to a halt on gravel softened by yesterday's rain. Doors swung open, and the family emerged, each step hesitant, uncertain, almost reverent. Nora watched from a respectful distance, camera in hand, but lowered at her side. She didn't want to intrude on something so private, so sacred. She wanted to witness, to remember, to let the moment speak for itself. Midnight stood unmoving at his post by the fence, just as he had every dawn and dusk for years. His ears flicked back, catching the sound of approaching footsteps. The rising sun caught the faint crescent scar beneath his left eye. He didn't shy or bolt, he simply watched. Emma Kavanaaugh, now 15, was taller than Nora remembered from the faded news clippings and family photos. But her face was unmistakable, a blend of hope and heartbreak, fragile but fierce. She paused a few yards from the fence, her hands shaking at her sides. For a moment she seemed unable to speak, her breath catching in her throat. Her mother, standing just behind her, squeezed her shoulder but let go, understanding that this moment belonged to Emma alone. Nora felt her heart pounding as Emma took a single, trembling step forward. The world seemed to contract, every sound amplified, the wind in the grass, the slow exhale of the horse, the faint chirp of a distant meadowlark. Then Emma spoke, her voice low but clear, echoing across the prairie. "Nightfire," she called. "It's me. It's Emma. I'm here. I came back." Midnight's head lifted, his ears perked fully upright. For a moment nothing happened. The pause stretched so long Nora's hand instinctively tightened on her camera, unsure whether to film or simply bear witness. The horse's nostrils flared, catching Emma's scent, memory and recognition flickering behind those deep, soulful eyes. Emma tried again, stepping closer, her voice trembling but unbroken. "Nightfire. Boy, I missed you. Please, please, come home." A shiver ran through Midnight's powerful body. He shifted his weight, testing the moment. Then, with a sound like thunder breaking the hush, he let out a piercing, wild whinny that shattered the silence. He reared back slightly, mane flying, then surged forward, closing the last yards between himself and the girl he had waited for. Emma burst into tears, running the final steps as Nightfire pushed his muzzle through the fence. She grabbed his face with both hands, pressing her forehead against his, her sobs swallowed by his warm breath. For a heartbeat, horse and girl became a single silhouette against the rising sun. Grief and hope tangled together in a reunion the prairie itself seemed to rejoice in. Mrs. Kavanaaugh covered her mouth, tears running freely down her cheeks, while Mr. Kavanagh wrapped his arms around her from behind, silent but trembling. Nora, overwhelmed, lifted her camera and filmed just a few seconds before lowering it again, unable to see through the tears that filled her eyes. The horse nuzzled Emma's hair, whickering low and soft, as if to reassure her that yes, he remembered, every hour, every season, every lonely dawn. Emma stroked his neck, her fingers tracing the crescent scar, whispering broken apologies and promises into his fur. Nora caught fragments. "I looked for you every day. I thought you were gone. I'm so sorry, boy. I'm so sorry." But the words hardly mattered. The meaning was in the touch, in the way Emma never let go, in the way Nightfire pressed closer, shuddering with relief. Clara watched from the tailgate of her truck, her lined face wet with silent tears. She offered no words, just a slow, grateful nod when Nora glanced over. Jasper, sensing the change, whined softly and leaned against Clara's boots. The family lingered in the golden morning, soaking up every second. Mrs. Kavanagh finally stepped forward, her voice hoarse. "We never forgot you, Nightfire. Not a single day." She stroked his mane, her touch gentle, reverent. Mr. Kavanagh, usually stoic, knelt by the fence, one hand resting on Nightfire's shoulder. "He looks older," he murmured, "but he's still our boy." Mm-hmm. Emma looked up at her parents, her face flushed with happiness and disbelief. "Can we take him home? Please, can we?" There was no hesitation. Mrs. Kavanagh nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "He's waited long enough." The family opened the gate, careful and slow. Nightfire hesitated just a moment, one last look north, a glance back at the lonely stretch of highway and the empty ridge where he had waited so long. Then, as if deciding that the waiting was over, he followed Emma across the threshold, every muscle trembling with anticipation. Nora watched, heart full, as Emma led Nightfire by the halter, her other hand never leaving his neck. She filmed a few more frames. The family gathered around their lost and found horse, the first tentative steps of a new beginning. But halfway through, she lowered the camera. Some moments, she realized, were meant to be lived, not captured. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows behind them, the family walked away from the ridge together, Nightfire in their midst. The prairie seemed to exhale, the weight of waiting finally lifted. Nora stood alone by the fence, grateful and exhausted, her faith in hope and reunion restored. The story wasn't over, but a chapter had closed, one that would live on in every heart that ever waited, and every soul that ever found its way home. The trip home from the ridge was silent except for the soft shuffling of Nightfire in the trailer. Emma rode in the back seat, still clutching the old halter, her knuckles white-eyed with disbelief and joy. Her mother kept glancing at her in the rear view, eyes shining with pride and worry, while her father drove slowly, taking every curve of the narrow road as if afraid to jostle a dream. The rising sun cast bands of gold across the land, the new day bearing witness to a miracle the family had almost stopped hoping for. The Kavanagh's new ranch was smaller than the one the flood had destroyed, but it sat on higher ground, a long patch of prairie with a single sturdy barn, patched fences, and the familiar smell of hay and horses. The land was different, less lush, but it was safe. And in the 3 years since moving, Emma had painted every stall with her own hands, planting wildflowers along the paddock. It was home, but the absence of Nightfire had made it feel unfinished, like a song with the last note missing. They opened the trailer carefully, Emma standing at the ramp, her breath fogging in the cool morning. Nightfire paused, nostrils flaring as he took in the new smells, fresh timothy, unfamiliar earth, the distant scent of cattle and creosote. His muscles tensed, hooves rooted to the trailer floor. For a moment, Emma worried he wouldn't come out, that he'd turn and bolt, fleeing the unknown. "Take your time, boy," she whispered. "It's just us." "You're safe." Her voice, gentle and steady, carried more weight than any tug on the lead rope. After a long moment, Nightfire stepped down, hooves striking the earth with the certainty of memory. He glanced around, body taut, and then, as if reassured by Emma's presence, followed her into the paddock. The rest of the family watched, hands tight around coffee mugs, breaths held. Nightfire walked the perimeter, nose to the ground, tracing the fence line as if mapping the edges of this new world. But when Emma opened the barn door and gestured him inside, he balked. Ears pinned back, muscles bunched in resistance. He took a few hesitant steps toward the darkened interior, then turned sharply and returned to the fence, staring north, body rigid and unyielding. Emma's mother sighed, her voice tinged with sadness. Maybe he just needs time. But Emma shook her head, resolute. "I'm not going to force him. He's earned the right to do things his way." That first night, Nightfire stood by the north fence, unmoving, eyes fixed on the endless sweep of prairie. The barn light spilled in a warm pool onto the ground, but he ignored it, refusing even the bucket of oats Emma placed nearby. She sat a few yards away, legs crossed, a book open but unread in her lap. The night deepened, cool and star-filled, and she began to talk. About school, about the horses she'd helped her father train, about the ways the world had changed since the flood. Her voice was low, never insistent, an offering of presence rather than demand. "I get it, she murmured, tracing shapes in the dust. "Sometimes you just need to see what's out there. Sometimes you're not ready to come inside." On the second night, she returned with her guitar, strumming softly under the silver glow of the moon. The music drifted across the paddock, tangled with the chirp of crickets and the lonely call of a coyote. Nightfire flicked an ear, then another, but did not move. Emma sang, a voice trembling on the high notes, letting the melody carry all the words she could never say aloud. Her parents worried about the cold, about the coyote tracks found near the fence, about the old injury on Nightfire's leg that sometimes made him limp in the mornings. But Emma was resolute. She brought extra blankets, built a small fire nearby, and always, always left the barn door open, hay and water waiting. Each night she'd whisper the same promise before heading to bed. "You don't have to come inside. Just stay." Days passed, and the routine became a ritual. In the mornings, Nightfire would allow Emma to brush his mane, carefully working out the tangles, her touch gentle and patient. She spoke softly, never reaching for a halter, unless he offered his head. Sometimes she'd find him standing closer to the barn than before, nostrils twitching at the scent of fresh straw, but when she moved to open the gate, he'd retreat to the far corner, watching with guarded ease. The neighbors noticed Nightfire's return, news traveling fast in a small town. Some brought carrots and sugar cubes, eager to welcome the prodigal horse. Nightfire accepted their offerings warily, but it was Emma he watched, Emma whose presence seemed to tether him to this unfamiliar home. Nora came by once, camera in hand, but she only filmed from a distance. Respecting the fragile trust that had begun to grow, she wrote an update for her followers, careful not to romanticize the slow, difficult process of healing. "Sometimes coming home is the hardest part," she wrote. "It's not about the door being open. It's about learning you can walk through it." The weather turned cold, the prairie wind fierce. Emma bought a new blanket for Nightfire, slipping it on when the nights dropped below freezing. Still, he never entered the barn, choosing instead to press close to the fence, eyes fixed north. Her father joked about stubborn animals, but Emma only smiled, undeterred. Each night, she'd sit beside him, back against the post, guitar in her lap, or a book, open in her hands. Sometimes she'd doze off, waking to find Nightfire standing over her, breath steaming in the pre-dawn air. She'd reach up and touch his cheek, and for a moment, he'd let her. It was slow work, this rebuilding of trust, a dance of patience and hope, of offering comfort without expectation. Emma found solace in the routine, in the knowledge that love was not a thing to be forced, but a place to return to, night after night. And so, as the days shortened and winter crept closer, the Kavanaughs learned to live with the rhythms of waiting. Nightfire remained outside, the barn door always open, the promise unchanged. Emma sang to him every night, her voice soft as snowfall, the words drifting across the darkness. "You don't have to come inside. Just stay." Summer faded on the prairie, replaced by the lazy heat of July and the electric promise of storm clouds on the horizon. The wildflowers Emma had planted now stood tall and bright against the fence, where Nightfire kept his quiet vigil, their colors stubborn against the browning grass. Every evening, Emma carried out fresh hay, clean water, and sometimes a handful of carrots or a scoop of sweet feed, talking softly about her day, or strumming her guitar, as the sun dipped below the horizon. The barn door remained open, hay stacked and blankets folded, waiting for the moment Nightfire might choose to step inside. The slow, gentle progress of trust became part of the family's rhythm. Emma could touch Nightfire's face without him flinching. He'd take apples from her palm, sometimes letting his chin rest against her shoulder. The neighbors marveled at his calm, remarking how he seemed less like a lost animal and more like a shadow who had finally found its shape in the light. But the past, like a hidden fault line, lay beneath the surface. The 4th of July dawned bright and cloudless, the kind of day that made the whole world feel wide open and full of possibility. Emma had been up early, helping her mother bake pies for the church potluck, laughing as her father rigged sparklers along the porch for the evening's celebration. By late afternoon, the neighborhood was alive with barbecues and the shrieks of children chasing each other through the tall grass. Even Nightfire seemed lighter, trotting the length of the fence with a restless energy, tossing his head as if daring the wind to race him. As dusk fell, people began gathering in backyards, arms full of folding chairs and coolers, the air thick with the scent of charcoal and cut hay. Emma sat on the porch steps, plate balanced on her knees, stealing glances at the paddock where Nightfire grazed. She'd planned to sit out with him once the fireworks started, knowing loud noises sometimes unsettled horses. She'd done her best to warn the neighbors, but she didn't realize just how quickly the night would spiral. The first firework went up with a whistle, a shower of red sparks raining over the dark fields. Nightfire froze, ears flat, muscles taut. Emma dropped her plate, running toward the paddock as the next explosion lit up the sky. Children cheered, adults clapped, and a chorus of booms rolled across the prairie. Nightfire began to pace, nostrils flared, eyes white-rimmed with panic. He spun, searching for an escape. Emma climbed the fence, reaching him just as a rocket burst directly overhead, painting the world in blinding white. "Easy, boy. Easy," she called, voice shaking. But instinct drowned her words. With a terrified snort, Nightfire bolted for the gate, left unlatched in the confusion of the day. He crashed through, hooves striking sparks from gravel, mane wild in the flickering light. Emma screamed for him, but he was already gone, swallowed by the shadows and the echo of fireworks still bursting across the sky. Her parents found her crying in the empty paddock, gates swinging loose in the night breeze. Mr. Kavanaaugh grabbed his flashlight, his voice tense with worry, while Mrs. Kavanagh hugged Emma tight. "We'll find him, sweetheart," her mother murmured, stroking her hair, but Emma shook her head, overcome by guilt and fear. "He'll think we did this to him," she sobbed. "He'll never trust us again." Nora saw the news the next morning, her phone lighting up with desperate messages from Emma and her mother. She rushed to the ranch, camera forgotten in the passenger seat, and helped Emma draft a post for social media. Missing horse, black gelding, crescent scar under left eye, last seen near the north fence on Kavanaaugh Ranch. Spooked by fireworks. Please, if you see him, call or message immediately. Neighbors joined the search, some on horseback, others on foot or ATVs, combing ditches and fields, calling Nightfire's name. Emma refused to rest. She printed flyers, pinned them to every telephone pole, and posted on every community page. The small town rallied, spurred on by memories of midnight's vigil and the story Nora had shared with the world. Night fell, heavy and restless. Emma wandered the fields with a lantern, her voice hoarse from calling. She replayed every moment, every laugh, every sparkler, every warning she should have given twice. Her guilt coiled tighter with each hour Nightfire was gone. "I promised him he was safe here," she whispered to Nora, tears running unchecked down her face. "And I failed." Nora put a hand on her shoulder. "Emma, he knows you love him. Sometimes old wounds take longer to heal. Sometimes even the people and animals we love most get scared and run. But you brought him home once. You can do it again." They searched through the night, hope flickering low, as dawn crept up, painting the ranch in soft pink light. Emma followed a hunch, her feet dragging her toward the back of the old barn, the one she and her father had rebuilt last summer, piecing it together with salvaged wood and memories. There, in the half-shadow, she saw him. Nightfire stood by the barn, head down, flanks streaked with sweat and dirt, but otherwise unhurt. His body trembled, breath coming in sharp bursts, but he did not run when Emma approached. She slowed, hands open, heart thudding. "It's me," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for you to get scared. I just want you to come home." He watched her with wary eyes, as if weighing her words. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Nightfire lowered his head, inching closer until Emma could touch his cheek. His entire body sagged in relief as she wrapped her arms around his neck, grounding him in the here and now. Nora and Emma's parents arrived minutes later, relief etched in every line of their faces. There were no lectures, no anger, only gratitude and a quiet, shared understanding. Nightfire walked with Emma back toward the paddock, slow but willing, every step a little steadier than the last. That evening, the barn door was left wide open, light spilling across the straw. Nightfire paused in the entry, but this time, when Emma knelt and called, he did not retreat. He followed her inside, circling once before lowering his head to drink, ears flicking at every sound, but no longer bolting for the shadows. The scars of the past remained, but the circle of trust was mending, stronger with every homecoming. And on the prairie, As darkness settled, Emma sang quietly to her horse, the old song drifting from barn to field. You don't have to come inside. Just stay. I'll wait with you, no matter how long it takes. After the long, restless night of searching, the dawn that followed felt like a gentle balm for the Kavanaaugh family, a quiet reprieve from worry and guilt. Pink lights slipped through the cottonwood trees, painting the world in hope. Emma barely slept. Instead, sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in an old quilt, watching the horizon and Nightfire's dark silhouette grazing just inside the paddock. When her father emerged with coffee and a tired smile, he rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. He's here, Em. He came back for you. That means something. Emma nodded, exhaustion etched into her bones, but her eyes never left Nightfire. She waited for that old unease, the instinctive flinch she'd come to expect. But instead, he stood a little closer to the barn than usual, his tail flicking in the golden light. The trauma of last night hadn't disappeared, but there was a subtle shift, a thread of trust, frayed and fragile, weaving itself back together. All morning, Emma tended to him, brushing out the sweat-streaked tangles in his mane and whispering small reassurances. Nightfire let her, nostrils quivering, occasionally nuzzling her wrist as if to anchor himself. When she brought out a fresh bucket of water and a small tin of oats, he followed her, hesitant but hopeful, toward the barn's wide, welcoming doors. Her parents kept their distance, watching quietly as Emma moved slow and steady, every gesture a gentle invitation. She scattered hay in the stall and knelt down, not calling or urging, just waiting. Nightfire circled the threshold, hooves echoing against the packed earth. For a heartbeat, Emma thought he might bolt, that old fear catching in his eyes, but instead he looked at her, then at the sunlight pouring through the doorway, and stepped inside. It was a small thing, a handful of paces across the line between outside and in, but for Emma, it felt like a miracle. Nightfire sniffed the hay, then moved to the water bucket, drinking deeply, sides heaving with each swallow. He circled once, ears flicking at the new sounds, the barn's familiar creak, the hum of distant cicadas. He didn't panic, didn't turn away. He stood in the center of the stall, head low, and simply breathed. Emma knelt beside him, pressing her forehead to his shoulder. Her words came in a trembling whisper. "You're safe now? I promise. You're home?" She stroked his neck, tears blurring her vision, and for the first time since the flood all those years ago, she let herself believe it might be true. Her parents approached, and cautious, emotions raw. Mrs. Kavanaaugh reached out, fingers grazing Nightfire's mane, while Mr. Kavanaaugh crouched at Emma's side. For a long while, the family just sat in the quiet barn, basking in the warmth of reunion, the smell of hay and horse and summer all around them. It was as if the barn itself remembered, its walls rebuilt with care, holding on to the echoes of loss and the hope of new beginnings. Outside, the sun climbed higher, but the family lingered, unwilling to let the spell break. Nightfire shifted, circling his stall as if mapping its every corner, then finally settled, folding his long legs beneath him and laying down for the first time since coming home. It was a gesture of pure trust, of surrender to safety. And Emma let out a shaky laugh, brushing her tears away. "He's never done that before?" she whispered. "Not since—" Mr. Kavanaaugh smiled, voice thick with emotion. "He knows he belongs here. Emma, he's telling you in the only way he knows how." Emma didn't move, didn't dare break the quiet. She stayed beside Nightfire, humming softly, a lullaby from her childhood, a song she used to sing when storms raged outside and fear pressed close. As her voice drifted, Nightfire's breathing deepened, his body finally at rest. The barn door, wide open to the sunlight and breeze, stood as a symbol. There would be no more locked gates, no more forced goodbyes, only the promise that he could stay or go as he wished. That afternoon, neighbors came by in small groups, peering over the paddock fence with cautious hope, and Nora arrived too, camera in hand, but instead of filming, she just stood at the doorway, watching Emma and Nightfire with quiet reverence. She snapped a few candid photos, not for her audience, but for Emma, to remember the day Trust came home. Word spread through the small town that midnight, the horse who had waited had finally stepped inside. People brought treats and cards, stories and quiet tears, each visitor paying silent tribute to the long vigil and the love that finally brought him back. Some left small tokens, braided ribbons, wildflowers, a faded photograph of Nightfire from years before. Emma accepted each gift with a grateful smile, her heart too full for words. As evening fell, the barn glowed with lantern light, laughter and music drifting from the open doors. Emma stayed with Nightfire as darkness settled, her head resting on his shoulder, the rhythm of his breathing a comfort she hadn't known she needed. As she whispered promises into his mane, of safety, of home, of never leaving again. Her parents, sitting nearby, watched in silence. Mrs. Kavanaaugh wiped her eyes, leaning into her husband's steady presence. "He chose to stay," she said softly. "We did everything we could. But in the end, it was always his choice." Mr. Kavanagh nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "That's all any of us can do. Open the door and wait." As midnight crept in, Emma rose and gently latched the stall gate, not to keep Nightfire in, but to keep the world at bay. Just for a night. The barn was quiet, a sanctuary wrapped in warmth and light. Nightfire slept, Emma's song lingering in the rafters, a lullaby for all the waiting hearts. The door remained open all night, moonlight pooling across the straw. But Nightfire did not leave. He stayed at peace. The long journey home, at last finding its resting place in the gentle hush of a Wyoming barn. Summer slipped quietly toward autumn, the Wyoming prairie awash in golden rust. The days grew shorter, the air carrying a faint chill that signaled new beginnings and the close of a long journey. At the Kavanaaugh Ranch, life settled into a gentle rhythm, one shaped by patience, healing, and the unspoken bond between a girl and her horse. Nightfire, now affectionately called Midnight by the locals who'd followed his story, adapted to his second homecoming with the grace of an old soul. There were still moments when thunder rumbled over the hills, and his muscles tensed, eyes flickering with old panic. Emma never rushed him. On those evenings, she'd walk out to the barn with a blanket and her guitar, singing softly until the storm passed and Midnight's trembling faded. In the months since he'd stepped inside, Nightfire's world grew larger and gentler. He followed Emma through the open pasture at sunrise, his hooves drumming the earth in easy harmony with her boots. He watched over the new foal, a leggy chestnut with a curious blaze, nudging her with gentle affection when she stumbled or strayed too far. His presence became the quiet heartbeat of the ranch, a testament to both endurance and forgiveness. Emma thrived in this new chapter. She took on more responsibility at the ranch, waking early to feed the horses, cleaning stalls with a hum on her lips. Each afternoon she brushed Midnight's coat until it gleamed, her head resting against his strong neck, both of them soaking up the warmth of late summer sun. The scar beneath his eye never faded, but it no longer spoke only of pain. It became a badge of survival, a mark of all he had endured and overcome. Neighbors still visited, sometimes bringing children who wanted to meet the horse who waited. Emma would smile, telling them the story in her gentle way. How Midnight had stood watch by the fence for years, how he'd run when frightened, how he'd finally found the courage to come home. He was never lost, she'd explain, just waiting to be remembered. Nora Bell, whose camera had first captured Midnight's vigil, returned one last time before autumn deepened. She found Emma in the pasture, brushing Midnight while the foal kicked up her heels in the background. Nora didn't film that day. Instead, she joined Emma, the two women sharing quiet conversation as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with shades of lavender and gold. "Do you ever wonder why he waited?" Nora asked, a voice soft. Emma looked up, hand resting on Midnight's withers. Sometimes I think it was hope. Sometimes stubbornness. Maybe he just knew we'd find each other again, no matter how long it took. They watched the foal chase butterflies in the tall grass, and for a long while, neither spoke. There was peace in the silence, a feeling that the hardest parts were finally behind them. When Nora eventually posted the closing chapter of Midnight's story, she let Emma's voice carry the lesson. Some don't wander, they wait. Through fire, through silence, through everything that tries to break them. And when love returns, they remember. They always do. The story rippled outward, on social media, on local news, and in the hearts of everyone who'd followed the journey from afar. Strangers sent letters, sharing their own tales of loss and reunion, of animals who had waited, of people who had not given up. Midnight's story became more than a tale about a horse and a girl. It became a reminder that waiting is not weakness, that hope is a quiet, enduring strength. Life on the ranch moved on. Emma started high school, balancing homework with chores, always making time to walk the fields with Midnight. She taught the foal to lead, patience etched in every lesson, her laughter echoing across the golden hills. Sometimes, late at night, she'd find herself at the fence where Midnight had waited so long, looking north into the wide, open dark, grateful for every morning she got to wake up and see him there. Midnight still flinched at thunder, still shied from fireworks, but he no longer ran. Emma let him choose, inside or out, alone or beside her. Trust, she'd learned, was not about shutting doors, but about opening them and waiting for love to step through on its own time. One evening, as the sun settled behind the mountains and the prairie was drenched in soft, honeyed light, Emma brushed Midnight's coat in the pasture. The foal napped nearby, the air alive with the scent of wild sage and distant rain. Emma leaned her head against Midnight's strong neck, closing her eyes as his breath warmed her cheek. She spoke quietly, just for him. "You're safe, Midnight. You always were. Thank you for waiting for me." In that simple act, the gentle brushing, the quiet words, the golden light, there was a sense of closure, a circle, finally complete. Midnight nickered softly, turning to nuzzle her, the two of them framed against the endless sky. Whole and home, at last. Some don't wander, they wait, through fire, through silence, and when love returns, they remember. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone you care about. Out there, someone's still waiting, maybe for you. Like and follow for more true stories of hope, healing, and the unbreakable bond between people and the animals who wait for them.